It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Well, hello there. Howdy ho there. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? Jim Santora is here today. Jim is an author who's written a book called The Underrated Rock Book, the 200 Most Overlooked Albums from 1970 to 2015. It's an interactive book. I think it comes with a CD, and you're supposed to play the song and then read and play, and gives you something to do as well as listening to some great music that you may have never heard before. He will be up. Before he wrote the book, he was a radio host. He was a writer, promoter. He was on a South Jersey radio station. He was also a vocalist for a couple of bands. He'll tell us all about that. After the interview, we've got music to play. My apologies to everybody on Music X-Ray and Music Submit. Better late than never. We're finally getting to them, cleaning out the backlog. We've got 5 really great songs for you today. The first one up will be Soul Keeper by Amos, followed by Aurora Drawing by Comey. I think it's Comey, K-O-M-I-E. Next is Constantly by Rise and Run. Damaged by the Prima Donna Reeds. I like that name. And finally, Silence by Todd Michael Smith. If you are an indie musician and you're looking for a radio promotional package, please check out our radio promotional package that we are offering. It's a good deal. Your track will air 28 times a week for 1 month. And you'll be on all of our terrestrial and online platforms. We're getting more every day. We're now on iHeart. And I think we've got a new terrestrial station, FM station in Washington, D.C. You'll also get a 15-minute interview on the show to promote your latest single, EP, LP, or whatever you want to talk about. And your profile will stay on our website forever and ever, even after your promotion is finished. So check it out, douglascolemanmusic.com/CRPP, or just go to douglascolemanshow.com and click on the Complete Radio Promotional Package link. We will be right back with Jim Santora. Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Jim Santora. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Douglas, glad to be on. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. Your book sounds really interesting, and we'll get to that in a second. I did want to ask you a little bit about, on your bio it says that you have worked for the last 30 years as a radio host. Tell me a little about your radio work.
Sure. I started off in college, actually. I did a couple different college stations here in southern New Jersey. Started that. That was like the late 80s. And then in the late 90s, I actually had done some work for an AM station. It was WNJC, located in South Jersey as well. Spent about 2 years there. And then between that, I had done a lot of journalism stuff. I wrote for some different magazines, music magazines primarily, but I also did some stuff covering sports and other general town-type information. And when we got into the 2000s, I got into the internet radio side of things, so I did a bunch of shows on different stations for the last just about 15, 20 years. So I kind of broke into it pretty early when internet radio was first coming onto the scene, and ran my own station for a few years, and I kind of stopped everything about 2015. When I got out of that, decided to focus on the book.
Yeah, you got into it long before I did. And I was doing a live radio station show from Florida, and that lasted all of 8 weeks. and, because I absolutely hated doing live radio. There was just too many things, technical problems, and trying to get people booked for an exact time. I think people have gotten to the point now where it's like Netflix and television. Yes. People do not want to have to tune in at 3:00 in the afternoon on a specific day to watch or to interview. You know, they kind of want to do it at their own time. So we just had to go to a pre-recorded format so we could get,
I've totally seen that. And I actually, even though I had done my own shows and with interviews and things like that, I always noticed that having, podcasts that kind of go along and replays and stuff like that, that way people had options. And that's a beautiful thing about kind of where we're at now with the technology.
Even just scheduling people, you find that if you have a 1 week window and you offer people 2 or 3 days, chances are they're going to be all right, available on one of those days. But if you only do a weekly show at an exact time, and then they call 5 minutes late because they got stuck in traffic or, it's just an endless amount of excuses. Okay, so you've worked also a performer. Are you a musician?
I always tell people I played the bass, but nobody ever wanted me to go on stage to actually play the bass. So I did vocals. There was three or four different bands that I was in where I was the lead vocalist. Two of those bands, one was known as 77 LeSabre, and the next one was Redliner. They were all within 2006 till about 2011. And those were two bands. We released CDs, actually had some songs that got some small airplay on different radio stations. With 77 LeSabre, we got to perform with bands like Tesla, which was definitely a highlight for myself. And Redliner was more of was a lot more of a heavier band compared to the 77 LeSabre band. So we did get to perform primarily in the Philadelphia area. A lot of bigger, some of the bigger venues that were in the area for local bands and stuff, and got on a couple national type bands with bands like Epica and stuff like that. So, but they were more on the heavy metal side of things. But still great experiences all the way around. And it was great to kind of get into that side of the music scene, and and be able to do the performing piece, which would it's kind of a different realm from doing like the radio and the journalism thing. And I was always had a thing for writing lyrics, and even though I wasn't always well versed musically as far as playing a guitar or something like that, I hooked up with some really good guitar players that kind of made my lyrics all of a sudden become songs, and that was a great feeling.
So was it your associations with the bands that sort of allowed you backstage access to other bands? Did you do interviews with famous musicians?
Yeah. So my first actual interview that I did with any like a known band was back in the 1990s. I interviewed Klaus Eichstadt. He was a guitar player for Ugly Kid Joe. I was writing for a magazine called In Tune during that time. It was located in Atlantic City. Got to go to Philadelphia and meet him and get to see the band and do an interview, and that was my first real taste of actually getting in front of somebody that's sold hundreds of thousands or millions of records at that time, because at the time Ugly Kid Joe was a fairly popular band in that early to mid 90s. So that was kind of my first. But when I started getting the internet radio piece and started doing interviews, it was kind of a who's who of different people. I've interviewed members from like Kansas and the Outlaws, some more of the heavy metal or hard rock type bands like an LA Guns, King's X, Zebra, and even some newer bands, even though I stopped in 2015, but up-and-coming bands that have kind of become popular in the last 5 to 10 years, like Asking Alexandria, for example. So there's a whole bunch of bands that over time that I've had the opportunity to either have phone interviews with them, meet them in person at shows. But it's a great experience to sit there and just, talk about music, talk about their process when they're doing things, recording, whether it's talking about a particular album or particular songs, and just their different stories and how they relate musically with stuff. It's really good experience, to meet these people, and the vast majority of them are very down to earth, which, you sometimes people have this thing where some musicians are kind of up on this pedestal somewhere, but the reality is they're just like the rest of us, and there's a lot of them that have some great stories to tell and enjoy talking about music.
Well, it's very true, and I've done a lot of interviews with musicians, and I don't find musicians to be particularly snobby. I'm not going to say who I do find particularly snobby, but
there are a few. There are a few.
But for the most part, most musicians that I've talked to are great. And being a musician myself, it's easy for me to talk to them because we can talk in sort of the same language.
Right.
Now, you've written a book called The Underrated Rock Book, and the caption on the top here, it says, "Rock music is not dead. It's just changing course." I hope that's true, but, I don't think that rock music has been what it was since probably grunge. And I mean, it died a lot in the 80s, and then grunge was like, the dead cat bounce. And then after that, it just kind of fizzled away. But now I do see bands like Greta Van Fleet, who I'm a big fan of now, doing, reboots of Led Zeppelin and Rush and AC/DC. And,
right.
I don't know. What do you think? You said it's changing course. What does that mean?
Well, to me, and again, I just recently turned 50 in April. So, when I put this book together, I've gone through a whole gamut of different types of rock music that I've been exposed to from when I was a young kid, and I talk about it a little bit in the book, rummaging through my mother's record collection, listening to everything from like the Beach Boys and Dick Dale, like all the surf rock type stuff, to like Elton John, Chicago, and so on, until I got to a point where I was into the rock, classic rock, the 70s and 80s, going into hard rock and metal, and like you said, grunge. And what I see is like music now, especially when I was starting to do these internet radio shows, that even though popular music, because there used to be a time where all these different genres could be popular at the same time. There was a time where, rock acts and pop acts kind of, could share the top 40 charts. And now you kind of see where it's kind of dominated. Everything's pop and hip hop and country, and kind of the rock artists have kind of gone off to the side. But there's still an audience. When you sit there and look at different festival shows that are out there and the music that's still coming out, it's more or less kind of gotten into this little bit of this underground piece, and of course then there's the finds like the Greta Van Fleets that are, I think they're amazing. I know they get ragged on a lot in the press, and people don't like them because they say they're Led Zeppelin clones or whatnot, but they're a great band to listen to. And there's so many other bands that are like that. There's a couple other bands that I'm into, like there's a band called Nothing More, out of Texas, that they've had a couple albums out that, they kind of have this harder edge kind of, I want to say they're kind of a little bit all over the place, almost kind of like a heavy prog with some a really good vocalist, but they kind of are all over the place, and these are the kind of bands that I think are, there's going to be. I want to say there's a peaks and valleys. So I think right now rock music is in this type of valley, but eventually it'll come back up, and we don't know who those bands are going to be. I think we're just waiting for that next big wave where people are going to grow old of what is considered popular music right now, and get back to guitars and vocalists without auto-tune and stuff like that, and have this whole wave. And one of the other things I see also is there's a couple bands, some of even the harder rock bands are tending to kind of bring in some of these pop influences, like a Bring Me the Horizon. There's another band called Shapes, which I was just listening to, that kind of combines some of these pop and almost techno type elements to like a rock sound. And it's very interesting. For most people that might be my age or a little older or in their 40s might not be into it, but I could see where a younger person, like a younger me, might gravitate to something like that. And that's where I think things are going. I think things are different, kind of adapting. And, at some point we're going to have a band that's going to be the next, whether it's a Linkin Park or a Kiss or a Def Leppard, that's going to just all of a sudden have an album that's going to just blow people's minds. And next thing you know, they're the next great band.
Well, I certainly hope so. The one thing that has changed, that I think has changed forever, is I'm actually a little bit older than you. I'm 57, but we're kind of in the same genre of music. The one thing that has changed forever, I think, unfortunately, is the mystique. Because back when I was a young teenager, long before the internet and long before videos, you never got to see your favorite band unless you went to their concert. That was the only time you'd ever see them. They would rarely be on television. You could maybe see a news article about them in the newspaper or in the fan magazines. You'd see some pictures or something. But that was it. So the mystique of these bands was just unbelievable. Now, with social media, you can see what they do every day, and you can see all the pictures of their dogs and cats on Facebook. And I think that kind of hero worship is gone. I think it's gone forever. I also think kids now have a much less of an attention span for music than they did when we were growing up. I don't know of that many kids that'll sit and listen to a whole album. They do, especially when you listen to stuff on a phone, and to me, that's just a total waste, because here the musician has put hours, days, weeks, months into a grand production, and you listen to it on little earbuds on a phone, and it's like, no, you're losing so much of the generations of sound that went into that album. But that's not to say, to your point, that's not to say that there can't be another great band that comes out with a great album that sells a lot. But even then, you're getting into, well, what do you mean by selling? I mean, it's going to be streaming. It's going to be digital downloads. The selling of the actual record isn't quite what it used to be. People could make a living at that. Now it's pretty difficult to do.
Totally, and I totally agree with you there. It's a very hard line now where, and you actually can see it when they actually show album sales. Like when you see some of the artists that are selling in the Billboard Top 200, they're bands with albums or greatest hits packages that, the two of us have obviously listened to. The Queens, the Motley Crues, are all because of movies that they've just put out that people are gravitating towards their music. But you'll also see some Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction or AC/DC albums that are still selling. And I did an interview years ago with a independent artist, and the one time we talked about this at the early stages of when iTunes was really starting to really, ramp up and kind of be a place where you could go and download songs, and you pay your 99 cents and get a single. And, brought up a very good point that, when rock music first started and rock and roll, going back to like Elvis and Buddy Holly, the idea was a single, and the focus was on the singles, and then eventually albums came in, and then people were able to gravitate towards where the albums became kind of the staple. You still had singles, but then you had like these albums that you could have. And so you had singles that were on the radio, and if you liked that, you bought the single, but if you really liked the band, you bought the album, or you bought both because you wanted to buy everything that the band had.
Right.
And I think now, it's kind of in this world now where, if you hear something now, it's almost like everything's a single. I mean, sure, there's certain songs that may get put on a radio, or if we're talking about satellite or internet radio, whatever the case would be. But it's almost like every song technically is a single. So I could go and we'll take the Greta Van Fleet album, that's out right now. I bought the album. I went, got on Amazon, ordered a CD because I enjoy their music, so I want the album. And I don't download a lot of stuff. There's some things that I do if I like a particular song, and not necessarily the whole band, where I'll pick, listen to a song, and then, hey, if I like it, I'll go order the CD. I might be one of the few people that still goes out and spends money on, 30 plus CDs a year. But there's other people that may only like 3 songs, so they'll download the 3 songs and that's it. And I think that's kind of the business model now, where the push isn't so great for, an entire album. Unless you're into bands that have, where they're older bands. And I've seen certain bands, like the last couple of years, Cheap Trick's put out a couple albums, and they've actually sold pretty well. And album sales for them were cracking into the top 100 or top 40 in the albums charts, and I think it was more because of who they were. They're still putting out really great songs, and people were gravitating to that type of music where, that they were fans of them from the 70s and 80s, when they kind of had their hits and their big runs, that, all of a sudden it's kind of a nostalgia piece, like, oh, there's a new Cheap Trick album. And I think that's where it's kind of divided right now. I think at some point, the actual like CDs sales, and actually now we're going back to album, people buying albums, spending $30, $35 on actual albums, and going back and grabbing some of that old stuff, or even some of the stuff where the new stuff they're releasing different things. So there's a lot of different avenues, I think, that bands have to sell themselves and sell their music. And I think it is still kind of tough. I think there's bands that obviously they have to hustle a lot more than they used to, where, back in the day it was all like A&R reps and other people promoting and doing all that kind of stuff that, the bands didn't have to really do as much of in the past.
Right. And, I don't have a problem with any of the new ways that people can obtain music. The only one I have a problem with is streaming. And I'll tell you why. Because if you digitally download a song, it's 99 cents or $1.19. That's fine.
Right.
But streaming is a penny per play. Mm-hmm. Now, the greatest songs in the world that were absolutely my favorites, I don't think I've played 100 times to equal that one download. I don't think I've listened to it that many times. And it's I think it's a ripoff to the artist. If somebody buys your album, if we go back to vinyl, and they paid $10 for the album, you could play it once, you could play it 0 times and throw it in the bin. The artist still got his money. But this pay-for-play thing, I don't like it at all, because the math doesn't work. It just doesn't work in the artist's favor. Yeah. And honestly, it doesn't work in the record company's favor either. So I think everyone loses on that, except the consumer because they only have to pay a penny if they just want to listen to the song once.
Yeah, and that's where the Spotify's and places like that. I mean, Spotify. I have an iPad. I have Spotify up, and a lot of times I'll give a listen to. There's a new album that comes out. I definitely want to preview it. And if I like songs, I'm going to download songs, and I'm going to buy CDs, and that's just me. And I know there's other people. I have two kids. One's going to be 22. The other one just turned 18, and they kind of, my son will buy a CD here or there if he really enjoys the artist, but most of the time it's the Spotify world, it's the YouTube world where they can listen. They have an endless amount of songs that they can listen to on a playlist and kind of go through that. But I totally agree with you. It kind of hurts the artist, unless if they're going and touring and now you're going to see them live or you're going to buy a T-shirt or something like that. So, I kind of see some of that where that could be the option of where bands kind of compensate themselves. But I think it's definitely a lot tougher road for a band now, getting out there trying to make a living doing stuff and the more established bands and what they were able to do, 20, 30 years ago.
Well, I agree. We got to kind of move it along. I just want to get to your book. Your book's called The Underrated Rock Book, and it's an interactive book. So I assume that you go through it and then you play a song and then you come back to the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the idea of what I actually had put together here was, and I always had an idea of writing some sort of a book that was going to be dealing with music. I was just trying to figure out what that would be. And I had a vast collection of albums that, to me, I thoroughly enjoyed, but I knew that they, for whatever reasons, there were roadblocks as to why these albums or the artists in general were not successful. Why a certain album wasn't bigger than what it was. So what I did was I went through, and I always tell people the first 100 that I put in the book were probably the easiest ones. And then I did a lot of research. I had other people offer suggestions. I was online on my different sites, trying to get different feedback. And then even me researching, I would research an artist or be listening to a particular album, and then I'd get taken into another stream somewhere where I would find another band and check something out and say, wow, that's really cool stuff. I need to listen to more of this. And that's how this book kind of continued to generate. And when I got to my 200, that was kind of my stopping point. But I kind of had ground rules for it. I only wanted to focus for a 45-year period, so that's why the 1970 to 2015. I kind of opened it to any rock genre, and then only one artist per album, unless it was like somebody was in a super group or somebody had a solo record, and then that kind of fit in. But no greatest hits packages, no live albums, strictly just albums from artists. And it was a really great exercise, and to go back and re-listen to so many of these albums where they just, you wonder where people were when they kind of missed the mark, or maybe people didn't get it, or the band kind of changed directions or wanted a different sound, and it just didn't kind of work out. And these are the kind of stories that I tell about in the book and mention certain songs. So the idea is somebody reads this book and sees something that they may remember, or have an album that maybe they didn't like before. And the idea is because we have all this technology, to get on a Spotify or get on YouTube and pull a song out and listen to that. And a lot of the reviews that came back were just that, where people have said, what a great read, so that they went back and found all these different 80s albums, for example, that they didn't even know existed. And now they're listening to them and they're falling in love with these albums, with bands and different albums that they were not familiar with. And that's kind of the general feedback from different people that have either, sent me messages, or I've done different things online where they sit there and say, hey, this one was really good. You were spot on. This list matches, some of these are some of my favorites too. So it was really good to hear all that kind of positive stuff where, I'm kind of on the same wavelength, or there's other people that kind of think the same way about music, which is great. But I also put a disclaimer in there that people are allowed to disagree with this book because it's just myself and my own opinions. So there are people that would sit there and send comments back and say, hey, you put, like the example I have, Rush's Grace Under Pressure album made it in here. And I've had all kinds of people tell me, no, it's, Caress of Steel or, 2112 or whatever albums, you can name just about any Rush album that would get in there. But those are the kind of feedback I was hoping to get too, where people would say, how about this album? Or, I think this one would have been more underrated than what you selected. And that's another part of this book too, because it's also a conversation piece, and people have shared this book with relatives and friends, and then I've gotten feedback from those people saying, hey, somebody let me borrow the book, and I just want to let you know it was a great read, and I really enjoyed reading about these particular albums and stuff. So it's been a great experience so far as far as me writing it, and then also having people read it and give me all kinds of different feedback. That was great.
Jim, we got to wrap. Thank you so much for coming on. The book is called The Underrated Rock Book. The author's name is Jim Santora. It's available on Amazon, I assume, and Amazon and
Books A Million, and basically anywhere where books are sold. You can go online, and if you do a search Underrated Rock Book, it'll give you all the different places. It's available on Amazon in paperback, but you can go any place else and get it in the ebook variety. Okay. Do you have a direct website? I do have a direct website. You can go to underratedrockbook.com. Okay. And it has all the information there, and we talk about the book, and just has all kinds of other general information that anybody's interested in. But it does have links to every location that we do have the book being sold at, so they can check the one that they would go to if they already have access to those. Okay, super. Jim, thanks so much for coming on. This was a nice conversation. I enjoyed it. Always love talking about music. Best of luck with the book. I hope it does well. All right. Thank you very much, and I appreciate being on.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on The Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps, record producer. This is my story about Elton John, working with him in those early years, going back to 1967 at Dick James, all the amazing tours, those first recordings, going through to Rocket Records. And it's an amazing story about his incredible rise to stardom and my part in that. So look forward to taking you on that journey. So here we go. Yeah, and to order this great audio CD, please just email me at stuartepps@talk21.com. That's Stuart, Stuart, Epps, EPPS, at talk, TALK, 21 in figures.com. Stuart Epps at talk21.com. Email me and I'll give you all the details for buying this brilliant audio disc. Thank you. Bye.
The Douglas Coleman Show is now offering a complete radio promotional package for music artists. Your track will air 28 times a week for 1 month over all of our online and terrestrial platforms, as well as permanently archive on Spreaker, iTunes and many other sites. Your profile will also be featured in our featured music artists page on our website. With this package, you will also get a 15-minute interview on our show to promote your latest single, EP, LP, or upcoming gig. Similar packages like this can run hundreds of dollars and often are subscription-based. Our package is a one-time fee of just $49.99. Please go to douglascolemanmusic.com/CRPP. That's douglascolemanmusic.com/CRPP for complete details. Let's work together to get your music heard.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
Acclaimed author of Garden, Jane Yates brings you the first book in a new trilogy, Octopus Pirate, a story of a foundling who has unusual talents, such as the ability to communicate with octopuses. As a baby, he was washed up on an island off the Scottish mainland. An eccentric former nun who lives alone with cats brings him up. He joins a circus and narrowly escapes plots against him, flees to Cornwall, builds a replica pirate ship that's also an airship to travel back in time to fight real pirates. Get your copy today from Amazon, only 99 cents.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
And now...
Hey, Rocky! Watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat!
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! No doubt about it. I gotta get another hat.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Heartbreaker, my soul keeper, take back everything you said. Jealous wakers, home breakers, everything is coming to an end. And I step into your shoes another time. And I step into your shoes another time. Heartbreaker, my soul keeper, take back everything you say. Find us keepers, thrill seekers, over underneath my bed. Broken secrets, angels, demons, everything is coming to an end. I fall into your arms another time. Away give a chance for wrongs to right. Leave a legacy worth reading. Be quick to love, give second tries. But it's constantly hard to breathe. Oh, every time you leave. Oh, we try to compromise. It doesn't mean anything when it's hard enough. When you I don't know where you are if you hear me, yeah. Oh, to sing these words have to voice. The love we had was unexplainable. Whoa, but a love like that don't come twice. No, a love like that don't come twice. When it's constantly hard to breathe. Oh, every time you leave. Oh, we try to compromise. Doesn't mean anything when it's hard enough. Ooh, just about the time you look me up, I'll be over it, oh, so over it. When you finally see the pain I'm going through, you'll be feeling it, oh, be feeling it too. You'll be saying the words that I should have heard over and over again. That it's constantly hard to breathe. Every time you leave, oh, we try to compromise. Doesn't mean anything when it's constantly hard to breathe. Oh, every time you leave it, oh, we try to compromise. It doesn't mean anything when it's hard enough.
me guessing with your manifold teeth. I've been a martyr straight down the line. I've tried to love you, but you're out of time. It's not the games you're playing, it's not the way you're mean. Can't you see it's not the words you say? It's the silence that cuts me to the bone. It's the silence that cuts me to the bone. Here comes a misery, here comes a fight, here comes another of your half-baked lies. At least you're talking, but your talk is cheap. I'll pay $1 million for some honesty. It's not the games you're playing, it's not the way you're moving. Can't you see it's not the words you say? It's the silence that cuts me to the bone. It's the silence that cuts me to the bone. Hey,
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guest, Jim Santora. Thank you, Jim. Really enjoyed talking to you. Also, thank you to Amos, Comey, Rise and Run, the Prima Donna Reeds, and Todd Michael Smith for their great music. This is Douglas Coleman saying I'll see you when I see you.